The moment between hearing an objection and opening your mouth determines everything. Most salespeople lose deals in that split second without even knowing it. How silence builds invisible authority in sales. There's something counterintuitive about high performance in sales that most people never figure out. Authority doesn't come from having all the answers instantly. It comes from demonstrating you don't need to prove anything. When someone throws an objection at you, your first instinct screams at you to defend yourself, to explain, to justify, to fill the silence with words, any words, because silence feels dangerous. But that instinct is lying to you. That reflex is exactly what's destroying your deals. Elite performers in any field share one characteristic that separates them from everyone else. They operate with deliberate control over their responses. They don't react. They choose. And that choice happens in the gap between stimulus and response. In sales, this gap is where fortunes are made or lost. Because when you respond instantly, you're communicating something non-verbal and powerful: desperation. The client feels it immediately, even if they can't articulate why. Your energy shifts. Your voice changes. Your entire presence screams that you need this sale to validate yourself. Now think about the opposite. Think about someone who hears your question, pauses, considers it genuinely, and then responds with clarity. What do you feel? Trust, competence, security. That person seems like they know something you don't. And in sales, perception is reality. When you control the rhythm of the conversation through strategic silence, you're not being passive. You're being precise. You're forcing the other person to sit with their own thoughts. And most people can't handle that. They start talking. They reveal information. They fill the void with details you would never have discovered by asking directly. This isn't manipulation. This is understanding how human psychology works under pressure. Ancient strategists built entire military doctrines around this principle. The side that maintains composure when tension rises wins. Always. Because composure signals strength. Reaction signals weakness. And every client, consciously or unconsciously, is evaluating your strength throughout the entire sales process. They're asking themselves, can I trust this person? Does this person believe in what they're selling? And your ability to pause before responding answers both questions simultaneously. Mental clarity in sales isn't about knowing more. It's about processing better. And processing requires time, even if it's just 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds are the difference between a closed deal and a lost opportunity. What high performers know about emotional control that amateurs don't. Every objection is a test, not of your product knowledge, of your emotional stability. The client isn't really asking about price, features, or timing. They're asking, how secure are you in your own value? And your response speed tells them everything. When you jump in immediately with explanations, you're failing the test. Because you're revealing that their doubt shook you, that their resistance triggered your survival mode. And survival mode doesn't close deals. Strategy does. The gap between mediocre and exceptional in sales isn't talent. It's discipline. Specifically, the discipline to recognize when your nervous system is hijacking your prefrontal cortex. When adrenaline floods your system because someone challenged your pitch, your brain wants to fight back immediately. It's evolutionary, it's automatic, and it's completely wrong for the situation. Because the client isn't a threat to your survival. They're a person processing information, and processing takes time. When you don't give them that time, when you bury them under more words, you're not helping. You're overwhelming. Think about negotiations throughout history. The master negotiators weren't the loudest voices in the room. They were the calculated ones. The ones who let tension build, who understood that whoever speaks first after a proposal typically loses. This isn't ancient wisdom. This is current neuroscience. When you create space in a conversation, you activate different parts of the other person's brain. They shift from defensive to reflective, from closed to curious. And curiosity is where deals happen. But here's what nobody tells you about this approach. It's uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. Your entire social conditioning is screaming at you to fill awkward silences, to smooth things over, to keep talking until everyone feels comfortable again. But comfort isn't your goal. Clarity is. And clarity often requires sitting with discomfort long enough for truth to emerge. The truth about what the client actually needs. The truth about what's really blocking the deal. The truth about whether this is even the right fit. High performers train this skill every single day. Every conversation is practice. Every moment of resistance is an opportunity to strengthen emotional control. And over time, what felt impossible becomes effortless. What felt awkward becomes your competitive advantage. Why your brain sabotages sales without you noticing. Your mind is running programs you didn't install, patterns you didn't choose. And in sales, these unconscious patterns are crushing your results without you even realizing it. When someone questions your offer, your amygdala interprets it as social rejection. And social rejection, to your primitive brain, equals danger. So it triggers a cascade of defensive responses designed to protect you. But protecting your ego isn't the same as closing the deal. In fact, they're usually opposites. This is the invisible battlefield of sales. It's not happening in the conversation. It's happening inside your skull. You are fighting against millions of years of evolution that programmed you to seek approval and avoid rejection at all costs. And every time you react defensively, every time you over-explain, every time you try to convince instead of clarify, you're losing that battle. Because your prospect can sense it. They might not know they're sensing it, but they feel the energy shift. They feel your neediness, and neediness repels. Now imagine rewiring those patterns. Imagine training yourself to recognize the trigger, pause, and choose a different response. Not because you learned a script, because you developed genuine emotional discipline. This is what separates professionals from amateurs. Amateurs are slaves to their emotional reflexes. Professionals are architects of their responses. And architecture requires planning. It requires that crucial gap between input and output. If this content is helping you see sales differently, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm show this to more people who need to understand how their own mind works under pressure. Because awareness is the first step. You can't change what you can't see. And most salespeople never see how their own anxiety is sabotaging their success. They blame the product, the market, the leads, anything except the real issue. They haven't developed the mental discipline to operate strategically when emotions run high. Every single interaction is training your brain, either training it to panic when challenged, or training it to pause and think. Which pattern are you reinforcing? Because whichever one you practice becomes your default, and your default determines your income.
The strategic pause that changes everything. There's a weapon hiding in plain sight that almost nobody uses. It's free, it's legal, it's devastatingly effective. And it's called the strategic pause, not hesitation, not uncertainty. A deliberate, conscious choice to think before you speak. This sounds simple until you try to do it under pressure. Until someone hits you with an objection that threatens the deal. Until your commission is on the line and your brain is screaming at you to say something, anything, to save the situation. That's the moment, right there. That's where deals are won or lost. Can you tolerate 3 seconds of silence while your entire nervous system is telling you to fill it? Can you breathe, think, and then respond instead of reacting? Because that ability is worth more than any sales technique you'll ever learn. It's the foundation everything else builds on. Without it, you're just performing scripts. With it, you're reading the room, adapting in real time, and responding to what's actually happening instead of what you prepared for. Ancient warriors understood this. They trained extensively on controlling their responses in combat. Because the fighter who reacts predictably loses. The fighter who chooses their moment wins. Sales is the same. You're in a form of intellectual combat. Not against the client, but against their doubts, their fears, their resistance to change. And you can't fight those things with words alone. You fight them with presence, with certainty. With the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you don't need to convince anyone of anything. When you pause before responding, you're also buying yourself processing time. You're giving your analytical brain a chance to catch up with your emotional brain. You're accessing information that was buried under anxiety. Maybe you notice something in their tone. Maybe you realize their objection isn't really about price, it's about trust. Maybe you see an opportunity to ask a clarifying question instead of launching into a monologue. All of this becomes visible when you create space. None of it exists when you're in reactive mode. This is the shift from amateur to professional. From someone who sells sometimes to someone who sells consistently. From someone who hopes for results to someone who creates them systematically. How to turn this knowledge into actual results. Understanding this concept changes nothing if you don't apply it. You could agree with everything you've heard here and still lose deals tomorrow by reacting instead of responding. Because knowing and doing are completely different. Doing requires practice, deliberate, uncomfortable, repeated practice until the new pattern becomes automatic. And here's how you start. Next conversation. When someone challenges you, count to 3 in your head before you speak. Just 3 seconds, it will feel like an eternity. You'll feel like you're taking too long. You're not. You're simply breaking an old pattern and installing a new one. Do this 10 times and it starts feeling natural. Do it 100 times and it becomes your operating system. Do it 1,000 times and you can't imagine selling any other way. This isn't just about sales. This is about operating how you move through the world. When you develop the discipline to control your responses in high-pressure situations, that discipline bleeds into everything. Your relationships improve because you're not reacting defensively. Your decisions improve because you're thinking clearly instead of emotionally. Your entire life elevates because you're operating from choice instead of compulsion. The people who win long-term aren't the most talented, they're the most disciplined. They were the ones who identified the small behaviors that compound into massive results and then did those behaviors every single day until they became automatic. Pausing before responding is one of those behaviors. It seems too small to matter. Until you do it consistently and watch your close rate climb, watch your confidence grow, watch clients start treating you differently because you're showing up differently. You now have information most salespeople will never understand. The question is what you'll do with it. Will you nod and move on, or will you implement it today? Because today is the only day that matters. Tomorrow is just another today that hasn't arrived yet. If this video shifted how you think about sales, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. And drop a comment telling me which part hit you hardest. Your engagement helps this reach more people who need to hear it. And the more people operating with mental clarity, the better the game gets for everyone.